Today we're going to give you a step-by-step instructional guide on how to build an evaporator for maple syrup out of an old oil tank. All right guys, we're going to walk you through a little bit of the build process on this evaporator. So we first started off with using an old oil tank. Now, a lot of these oil tanks can be found in old houses. A lot of homeowners want to get rid of them because they are antiquated or they have a lifespan. So chances are, if you look hard enough, you can find one of these for free. And there's a bonus, you might even get some free heating oil in it, which can be used for all sorts of things like starting fires and whatnot. So anyways, keep your eyes open for a old oil tank. Now this happens to be an old oil tank that we retrieved a while ago. We got two for the price of one. There was two in the basement. We ended up extracting those out of the basement and well, here they are. So in order to take the oil tank and make it a useful evaporator, first you gotta cut it up. And if you're ever making an omelet, you gotta break a couple of eggs. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this oil tank and we're gonna cut off 3/4 of the top. We're gonna go down a little bit in order to make our firebox. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. One is a plasma cutter, two is an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, and three would be this new fancy Diablo metal cutting blades that actually we ended up using on a cordless skill saw. Basically, you mark it out with a Sharpie and then you run your skill saw down the one side, down the front, and over the edge, the top portion of it. Now, you don't want to throw this piece away because it's actually useful in the following step.
I think we can still heat our house.
That's actually very clean comparatively to most. That's for the first fire.
Oh, beautiful.
It also adds a lubrication to the cut. Actually,
yes,
pretty clean.
You know what? This old metal has nothing to do with those new blades.
It's true.
They are a time saver.
That's crazy.
Normally you'd be in there with like an abrasive saw and cutting, or can you imagine using a torch on there?
Oh. No, I can't actually. Look at that's perfect. Look how beautiful that cut is.
It's wonderful. Maybe if I wasn't having a couple wobbly pops last night, it would have been a little straighter.
Looks good. Okay, so once that step's done, you're going to take the piece that you just cut off, and you're actually going to cut off the front of it, which is the kind of round portion at the front, like where the tombstone is, and you're going to reuse that piece because you're going to weld it on the back. And what that allows you to do is have a space for the smoke to go up from your firebox. So you take that piece, you cut it off, you clean it up a little bit with an angle grinder with a little flap disc so your weld will actually hold, and then you weld it on the best you can. Now this is an old oil tank, so there is a little bit of residual oil and stuff like that, so it's a little harder to weld, but do your best. Chances are, if you have any pinholes or anything like that, the smoke is going to head on up the chimney anyway, so not a big deal. So you just take that, weld it on, and then we're ready for the next step. After that step is done, you take some angle iron. Now, you can go buy angle iron, it's not that expensive, but I prefer to use old materials, found material, or stuff I can get for free. So we're ended up using an old bed frame, which is like the bed rails on a bed frame. They seem to be the right size. They're about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches angle. And then we used, again, our little circular saw with our metal blade, and we were cutting them up in order to fasten them on top of the evaporator. And what's gonna be there is our evaporator pan. So we wanna stiffen this up. We wanna put a couple of beads of weld all the way around the corners in order to stiffen up what's left of the oil tank.
Right around there.
Sweet.
Did you get these at Princess Auto? They're great. They have everything for a home build.
Why start measuring now?
Lift up.
What?
Lift up.
right, now that we're left with what looks like the creepiest baby crib ever, we're going to essentially clean the inside of the old heating drum by basically burning it off, because it is home heating oil at the end of the day, so it is flammable, and it's basically going back to its natural habitat. So that's the idea there, is we're going to burn it off, we're going to get rid of some of the excess paint, we're going to give us a nice clean surface, because we got to weld the inside of the firebox all together, so that, like, if you don't have oil in the way, it works a little bit better. So that's the plan now, is to essentially put some sticks in there, get a good fire going, get it nice and hot, burn off any of the excess fuel, and get it nice and clean. And to get it going, I got a little bit extra fuel oil right here. Come on, light. It's like the worst. Come on, it's too windy. See, this is how home heating oil burns. If you've ever seen it, it burns really clean, actually. All right, so that's that. I'm gonna put that in there. Let that kind of simmer. Sticks. Once we completed that process, we took a piece of steel, we bent it up into a shape of a chimney piece, and in this case it's a 6-inch chimney piece, and we cut the hole in the top of the tank where the tombstone's sitting, and we used the actual shape of the thing, and we traced it out with a Sharpie, and then we used a plasma cutter and we cut it out that way. Now, you don't have to, if you don't have access to sort of a bender, you can just stick a chimney in this thing. You don't actually need this collar, but if you have the ability to get a collar, it's not a bad idea to put one in, because it does hold the chimney in place once you have it all welded in place. All right, we're moving right along. So the next step is a place to have our firebox. Now, if you don't have access to really fancy plasma cutters and tables and stuff like that, you can simply cut yourself a square hole out of the front of this oil tank, put a hinge on it, and Bob's your uncle, you have access to put your firewood in to evaporate your maple syrup. Now, in this case, we have access to a plasma cutter. That thing's perfect. CNC'd, used the AutoCAD, and actually made a front plate, bent it all up nicey nice. Now, this is a little bit overkill, but this is our second build on this particular project, so we did want to make it a little bit more fancy. So you cut the face of it out, you place it in, and then what you do is you weld all the way around that thing. And then later on, you can put the door on. Put this out of... Yeah.
A long way to go.
Want me to hit?
Could just cut these back.
Yeah. She's tight. She's tight. She's supposed to be tight. I think it'll go. Not that. How are you, like, hitting it, or are you just pretending?
I'm hitting it.
Ha!
Okay.
Go up a bit. Yeah, that's true. One thing I didn't mention is that when you do the door, you kind of want an access to have a draft. So in this case, we actually cut a hole in the bottom portion of it. We added a hinge, and that allows us to regulate the amount of oxygen the fire is going to be using. Now, normally when you're evaporating maple sap, you're actually running this thing full tilt. Now, I like to be able to control the air, because when you're shutting it down in the evening and you're not completely done your boil, you can just basically turn the fire off by snuffing it out. So you would just close all the air to it, it would charcoal the wood, and then in the morning, you can just throw a match on there and the coal will light back up and you can continue your boil. Now, in order to make our door on this particular evaporator, we used an old boiler door. Now, these can be found not so readily anymore. This one was found a couple of years ago. We actually ended up getting 2 of them. They've been sitting around gathering dust, and this was the perfect opportunity to use such a door. Now, this door is really heavy, cast iron steel. It is designed for like a boiler from the 1900s or something like that. So we ended up fashioning a couple of brackets using the plasma cutter, drilled a couple of holes, and then we had these big metal pins that were allowed us to actually stick the door on and put the pins inside the hinges we made, and then that allows us to open and close our door. Later on, what will happen is we'll actually install a heat transfer plate on the inside of the door in order for the door not to warp. And if you don't want to put a heat transfer plate, you can always install a little bit of Roxol on the back of the door, because basically what you want to do is create sort of a barrier, a heat reflection plate, so that it doesn't actually have a lot of heat coming to the door. Because anytime there's an excessive amount of heat on the door, you're going to have thermal expansion and your door might warp. All right, one thing we didn't actually show in this video is that we installed a rope gasket around the door. Now, in order to do that, you put basically a little bit of a channel, and then you can buy rope gasket by the foot. It's like a fiberglass roping material that offers kind of like an air seal in order to ensure your damper actually works, because you want an airtight seal around your door. So we installed that at a later date. We didn't actually show it on the video, but that's an important step. You can also line the top of your evaporator box where the fire is and the evaporator pan in order to create more of a seal that way. I kind of like not having a seal around there, because what happens is the smoke kind of ripples around the pan and imparts its flavor into the finished product. All right, so you remember that piece that we cut off right at the start? Well, that piece comes into play now because it's actually a baffle that allows the hot air to direct itself towards the chimney. Now, what we do is we cut it off and then we put it inside the firebox, and that gives us kind of a 45-degree angle to channel our smoke up to the chimney. Okay, once we've all done that, we want to move on to the firebox. So the firebox needs a place for the wood to sit. Now, I like to take a bunch of angle irons and flip them upside down so they're got a peak, and you can use a little bit more of that bed rail in order to do so. And in this case, we actually manufactured a thing out of some brand new stuff because he had it laying around. But you can use bed rail for this, or whatever kind of material you have. Now, I like to leave a little bit of a space, a 1/4 inch or less, and that allows the fine ash to file down into the ash cleanout and to keep your chunky coals up at the top. Now, the reason why to leave a space up here is for airflow, because you can control your fire burn rate by your damper at the bottom. So that's why I leave a little bit of a gap. But once that's in place, it gives a really nice bed for the fire to sit, and it provides ample amount of oxygen for the fire itself. All right, the last step on this evaporator build is the fire brick. Now, the fire brick is probably the most expensive part of this entire build. Now, you don't have to use fire brick. You can use a thing called Roxol board, which is a really dense kind of insulation that you can install on the other side. I've done that in the past. I've also used Roxol, just plain old Roxol insulation behind kind of like a fencing material to hold it in place. The idea behind that is to allow the fire to be concentrated to the underside of the evaporator pan and not to the sides. Now, I've seen people not put any kind of insulation on the side, and it does work adequately, although when you're standing beside the evaporator, you're gonna have really warm legs. In order to install the fire brick, we ended up welding an angle iron to the outside wall, and then we slipped the bricks into the bottom row, and then we added the second layer of bricks stacked on top of it. Now, the top portion of the angle iron will actually retain the top brick, and the bottom one will retain the bottom brick. Now, we repeated the same thing for the other side. All right, now that we've got the entire maple evaporator built, let's give it its first test run to see how well it fires and see how long it takes to get our sap up to a boiling point. All right, now that we've got our evaporator built, all that's left to do is to go out and tap our maple trees. Now, you don't have to tap just maple trees. You can actually tap birch trees. They've done walnut trees, and sap will flow. So it happens in the springtime when the differential in temperature goes from above 0 to below 0. That's when the sap is optimal. Now, The bigger the differential, chances are the faster the sap will flow. So we started this a couple of days ago. We went out to all our maple trees in our bush, and we drilled holes in them on an upward angle in order for the sap to flow out the hole. We take our metal spile, we tap it in the tree, we hang a bucket on it, and then we wait. Usually it takes about a day or so for the buckets to fill up with sap. Now, the sugar content is rather low. That's why we have to boil it off. So we take our sap from our buckets and we actually bring it to our evaporator, we dump it in and we let it boil. Now, the actual content is about 40 liters of sap to 1 liter of maple syrup. So you need a lot of sap, you need a lot of trees to tap. So that's kind of why it's a long process, but it's very rewarding in the end. Let's see how this one's doing. This one was tapped a little while ago. Actually, not bad. We got about 3/4 of a pail. So drop into that. All right, now just head to the evaporator and start our boil. Dumping some sap in because we don't want to actually light this fire unless there's actually sap in the pan. Because the pan will do all sorts of funny stuff. This pan is actually built for a slightly larger. Oh, you want to make sure your valve is off. You only do that once. So the valve is off. Make sure your valve is off before you dump your sap in. So there we go. We got a couple of buckets in. Now you'll notice it looks a lot like water because it's mostly water. The sugar content is very, 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 very low. It takes 40 to 1. It's 40 liters of water to 1 liter of maple syrup. That's why this is such a labor-intensive process. I generally filter at the end. I don't filter when I dump it in here because the actual pine needles and the cedar things and stuff like that adds to the flavor, I feel. It's not as, you know, pure as the store-bought stuff, but in reality it gives you that extra little bit of taste. I've got, what do I got, 6 pails. So it's not a big haul, but it's actually enough to start to get a boil. So you want to treat this sap a lot like milk. So if milk's going to spoil, so is sap. So the one thing you want to do, especially when you first start. So if you got an evaporator this large, what I like to do is I put my sap in here, I bring it up to a boil, and then I can actually let it sit because it's sort of being pasteurized and it won't go bad on you. I just put like a lid on it, and then when the sap runs again, what I do is I add the sap to the initial boil, and then I carry on boiling until there's too much maple sap / syrup in the pan, and that's when I take it off and finish it. So I'm gonna light my fire, see how long it takes this to come up to a boil, because I'm rather curious to see how my efficiency improvements are going to work out with the fire brick and the extra Roxol and the actual like the tightness of the box. So that's we're gonna see how we do. Generally speaking, I like to install the actual evaporator on sort of a slope, so what it does is it has like a rolling boil and it kind of trickles like this, so it's always hotter on one end than the other. I don't know, that's probably a personal preference thing. I don't know if it actually makes a difference, but anyways, let's let our fire up, see how long it takes to get to a rolling boil, and see if we can not get some off of here just to kind of give it a taste, you know, for the season. Let's see how well we're doing for this this year for sugar content. All right, we're gonna take our first pull. This thing has been boiling all afternoon. We're sort of down to the nitty-gritty. I've tipped it up on its angle so she doesn't get a little too hot. But my idea is to pull a little bit off just to give you guys a little show, just to see what it's supposed to look like. All right, so I don't really want, I want to drain a little bit off because there's stuff in the pipe. Drain a little bit, all right. I don't want to waste too much of that. It takes too much work to harvest it and boil it down. You got like 40 to 1 is really what you're aiming for. This stuff is still a couple hours away from being finished, but I don't really want to boil it all the way down, because what's going to happen is it's going to just caramelize in the pan. I want to create more. So anyways, I'll just show you what it looks like now. I think it's cooled off a little bit. That pan was really cold. So anyways, can we see this? See this guy here? Camera focusing. All right, so we can see. Come on, why won't it focus? There we go. All right, so if you can see what it looks like, it's got that nice amber color. Can you see it? Uh-oh, I don't want to spill it. All right. If you look really closely there, you can see that amber color, and that's what you're going for. The darker it is, in theory, you've been boiling it longer, so it's got a higher sugar content. Also, later in the season, it tends to be a little darker because the trees do something weird. I'm not sure exactly, but the later it is. So anyways, this is not quite maple syrup yet. This is just kind of like just a test, just a sample, kind of what this year is going to bring us. So this is like the first boil of the season. Ah, that's pretty good. That's got a nice little flavor to it. It's not as strong as like the full-blown stuff, but that stuff's definitely good. Anyways, that's good stuff. All right, well, that pretty much concludes our maple evaporator build. If you guys enjoyed this one, make sure you join me on the next one.